She sheltered the Mafia boss during the freezing winter, but 7 days later, 20 Soldati appeared at her restaurant, and nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Subscribe now or lose us forever. Your comments and shares are our lifeline. Don't let this be our only encounter. Story unfolds. The blizzard that hit Chicago that January was the worst in 50 years, a merciless wall of white that swallowed the city whole. Melissa Wright wiped down the counter of her small restaurant for the third time that hour, a nervous habit when business was slow. At 26, she was both owner and sole employee of the Hearth, a modest establishment she'd poured every penny of her inheritance into after her grandmother passed. Tonight, like the 3 nights before, not a single customer had walked through her door. The howling wind rattled the windows as if mocking her silent desperation. Another week like this and she might not make rent. She was about to turn off the lights when she spotted a dark figure stumbling through the snow. The silhouette weaved unsteadily, barely visible through the frosted glass. Then it collapsed against her door. Melissa rushed forward, hesitating only briefly before unlocking the entrance. Self-preservation warred with basic humanity as she pulled open the door, nearly knocked back by the blast of Arctic air. A man fell inward with the door, his body frighteningly cold to the touch. His expensive suit was soaked through, his face alarmingly pale except for patches of angry red where frostbite threatened. "Oh my God," she whispered, dragging him inside with strength she didn't know she possessed. "Can you hear me?" His eyes flickered open, dark, unfocused, but somehow still intense. His lips moved, but no sound emerged. "Don't try to talk," she instructed, locking the door and hurrying to turn up the heat. "Let's get you warm." She helped him to a booth near the kitchen, the warmest spot in the restaurant. His breathing was shallow, his entire body trembling violently. Hypothermia, she realized. Without thinking twice, she rushed to make hot tea, then disappeared into the kitchen to prepare the heartiest soup she had. When she returned, the man was hunched over the table, his large hands wrapped around the mug of tea, eyes closed as if gathering strength. "I've got soup coming," she said. "You need to warm up from the inside out." He nodded almost imperceptibly. "What were you doing out there?" Melissa asked, sliding into the booth across from him. "The weather service has been warning about this storm for days." He took a shaky sip of tea before answering. "Car, broke down, phone dead." Each word seemed to cost him tremendous effort. She studied him more carefully now. Despite his current state, there was something undeniably commanding about him. Even half frozen, his presence filled the small restaurant. His clothes, though soaked, were clearly expensive. A tailored suit beneath a cashmere overcoat. A heavy gold watch peeked from his sleeve. Not your average stranded traveler. "I'm Melissa," she offered. "This is my place." "Anthony," he managed, his voice gaining a little strength. His accent carried hints of old-world Italian beneath Chicago inflections. The soup, her grandmother's recipe, thick with vegetables and beef, revived him somewhat. Color gradually returned to his face, and his trembling subsided. By the time he'd finished the bowl, he seemed almost human again. "Thank you," he said, his voice now a deep, smooth baritone that sent an unexpected shiver up her spine. "You may have saved my life." "Anyone would have done the same," she replied, though they both knew that wasn't necessarily true. He glanced toward the windows, where the blizzard showed no signs of relenting. "I don't suppose there's a hotel nearby?" Melissa shook her head. "Nothing within walking distance, and no taxis will be running in this. There's a cot in my back office you can use." The offer surprised her almost as much as it seemed to surprise him. "Just until the storm passes," she added quickly. He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes now clear and perceptive. "Why would you trust a stranger?" It was a fair question. A woman alone, offering shelter to an unknown man. But something in her gut told her that while this man might be dangerous in certain contexts, he wasn't a threat to her. "Because you need help," she said simply. And I'm not in the habit of sending people back into blizzards. A slight smile curved his lips, the first she'd seen. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and revealing a dimple in his left cheek. Your kindness is unexpected. The next 7 days passed in a strange sort of isolation as the blizzard raged outside, effectively cutting them off from the rest of the world. The power flickered but never fully failed, a small mercy. With nowhere to go and nothing to do but wait out the storm, they fell into an unexpected routine. Anthony recovered quickly, revealing a quiet strength that suggested he was accustomed to overcoming adversity. During the day, he helped around the restaurant, fixing the leaky faucet that had been bothering her for months, reinforcing the back door that never quite closed properly. At night, they talked over simple meals she prepared from her dwindling supplies. He spoke little about himself, deflecting personal questions with practiced ease. But he listened, truly listened, when she talked about her grandmother, the restaurant, her dreams of expansion that seemed increasingly unlikely given the economic reality. On the 7th day, the storm finally broke. Sunlight glinted blindingly off mountains of snow, and the sound of distant plows promised eventual reconnection with civilization. Anthony stood at the window, phone in hand, finally able to get reception. "I've arranged transportation," he said after a brief call. "They'll be here within the hour." Melissa nodded, surprised by the disappointment that washed over her. Their week together had been oddly comfortable, as if they'd known each other far longer than 7 days. "I'm in your debt," he said, turning to face her. "I don't take that lightly." "There's no debt," she insisted. "I'm just glad you didn't freeze to death on my doorstep." "Bad for business." Her attempt at humor fell flat against the sudden intensity of his gaze. "Nevertheless," he continued, "I pay what I owe. Always." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, simple white cardstock with just a phone number embossed in black. "If you ever need anything at all, call this number." She took the card reflexively. "That's not necessary." "Keep it anyway." There was something in his tone that discouraged argument. When a sleek black SUV pulled up outside an hour later, 2 large men in dark suits emerged, scanning the area with professional vigilance before approaching the restaurant. Anthony gathered his now dry clothes, pausing at the door. "Thank you, Melissa Wright." The way he said her name made it sound like something precious. "For everything." Then he was gone, leaving only the memory of his presence and a simple white card with a phone number. 3 weeks passed. The city dug itself out from the historic blizzard, life resumed its normal rhythms, and Melissa tried to convince herself that the strange week with the mysterious Anthony had been nothing more than an interesting anecdote. Something to tell her grandchildren someday. Business remained slow but steady, enough to keep the doors open but not much more. She was serving a late lunch to her regular Thursday customers when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up, and her heart stuttered. 20 men in immaculate suits filed into her restaurant, filling every available table. At their center, commanding attention without saying a word, was Anthony. He looked entirely different from the half-frozen man she'd rescued. Powerful, imposing, his dark suit perfectly tailored to his broad shoulders, his presence causing conversations to halt mid-sentence. The other diners stared, then hurriedly asked for their checks, clearly intimidated by the newcomers. Anthony approached the counter where Melissa stood frozen, a coffee pot forgotten in her hand. He smiled, that same smile that revealed the unexpected dimple, but now it was framed by the unmistakable aura of authority. "Ms. Right," he said with a slight nod. "I hope you don't mind us dropping in." "Of course not," she managed, professionalism kicking in despite her shock. "Welcome to the hearth." He gestured to the men now occupying her restaurant. "My associates and I were looking for somewhere to discuss business. I recommended your establishment highly." One of the older men, silver-haired with an expensive-looking ring on each finger, called out, "So this is the place that saved our Dawn from becoming an icicle, Dawn." The title hit Melissa like a physical blow. She'd heard enough stories growing up in Chicago to know what that meant. The pieces clicked into horrifying place. The expensive clothes, the commanding presence, the way he'd carefully avoided personal details. Anthony Moretti, head of the Moretti crime family, the man who controlled half of Chicago's underworld, and she'd let him sleep on her office cot for a week. "Your coffee is excellent," Anthony, no, Don Moretti, said smoothly, either not noticing her realization or choosing to ignore it. "Perhaps you could bring 20 cups while we settle in." Melissa nodded numbly, retreating to the kitchen on autopilot. Her hands trembled as she arranged cups on trays. The Mafia. She'd saved the life of a Mafia boss. And now he and his entire family? Organization? Whatever the proper term was, they were sitting in her restaurant, ordering coffee as if this were perfectly normal. By the time she emerged with the first tray of cups, the men had arranged themselves around the tables, with Anthony at the center, his back to the wall, facing the door, a position that allowed him to observe everything. Their conversation halted as she approached, resuming only after she'd retreated again. Throughout the afternoon, they ordered practically everything on her menu, consuming food and drinks as they conducted their business in hushed tones. They tipped generously, treated her with formal respect, and acted for all the world like ordinary businessmen. If ordinary businessmen carried concealed weapons and commanded immediate deference from everyone around them. As evening approached, the men began to leave in small groups until only Anthony remained, sitting at a corner table with a half-empty cup of coffee. "You figured it out," he said when she approached to clear his cup. It wasn't a question. Melissa nodded anyway, suddenly very aware of how empty the restaurant had become. "Does that change things?" he asked, his voice neutral but his eyes intent on her face. "Should it?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Most people would be running for the door." "It's my restaurant," she reminded him, surprising herself with her boldness. "And you're still a customer." He leaned back, studying her with renewed interest. "A customer who happens to be Don Moretti." "A customer who needed help and received it," she countered. "What you do outside these walls is your business." Anthony stood, towering over her small frame. "My associates were impressed with your establishment. Expect them to become regulars." It sounded like both a promise and a warning. "I treat all my customers the same," she said, lifting her chin slightly. "And that," he replied, reaching for his coat, "is precisely why we'll be back." He placed several $100 bills on the table. "For today's service." "This is too much," she protested. "Consider it an investment in a valued establishment." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Your kindness was not misplaced, Melissa. Neither is my gratitude." After he left, Melissa sank into a chair, the full weight of the situation finally hitting her. She had inadvertently earned the patronage, and possibly the protection, of the most powerful criminal organization in the city. The question was whether that would prove to be her salvation or her ruin. The hearth transformed virtually overnight. Each day brought waves of expensively dressed men who ordered lavishly and tipped extravagantly. They arrived in gleaming black cars, spoke in respectful hushed tones around Melissa, and created an atmosphere of contained danger that somehow drew in other customers rather than repelling them. Within 3 weeks, Melissa had to hire 2 additional servers and a line cook just to keep up with demand. Within 6 weeks, she'd paid off the outstanding mortgage on the restaurant and was considering renovations. Money that had been so tight for so long now flowed freely, all because she'd opened her door during a blizzard. Anthony himself appeared unpredictably, sometimes alone for a quiet coffee in the corner, sometimes with his inner circle for lengthy business discussions conducted in a mixture of English and Italian. He always greeted her with that same dimpled smile, always asked about the restaurant's needs, and always left generous payment regardless of how often she insisted it wasn't necessary. She learned to recognize the hierarchy among his men. Salvatore, the silver-haired older man, was Anthony's consigliere, advisor and right hand. Marco and Luca, two broad-shouldered men who rarely spoke, were his primary security. There were others whose names she gradually came to know: Vincent, who handled the books; Dominic, who oversaw what they euphemistically called territorial disputes; Paolo, who managed their legitimate businesses. They never discussed their illegal activities in her presence, maintaining the polite fiction that they were simply businessmen with particular security concerns. She never asked questions, telling herself that their money spent the same as anyone else's. But sometimes, when she caught glimpses of their conversation or noticed the occasional bruised knuckles or concealed weapon, reality would crash through her carefully constructed denial. These men were criminals, dangerous ones, and their boss was becoming increasingly important to her in ways that had nothing to do with business. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. The restaurant was quiet, just a few regular customers scattered among the tables. Anthony sat in his usual corner, reading something on his tablet while nursing a cup of espresso. He'd been coming alone more frequently lately, sometimes staying for hours with minimal interaction. Melissa was wiping down the counter when the bell chimed. Two men she didn't recognize entered, their eyes scanning the restaurant with predatory intensity. Unlike Anthony's associates, who wore their danger with refined restraint, these men radiated crude violence. Every instinct told Melissa something was wrong. She glanced at Anthony, who had lowered his tablet slightly, his expression hardening. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "We're looking for someone," the taller man said, his gaze fixed not on her but on Anthony. "Heard he might be here." "We serve anyone who's hungry," she replied carefully. "What can I get you?" The shorter man sneered. "We're not here to eat, sweetheart." Before she could respond, Anthony stood. The movement was unhurried, almost casual, but it immediately commanded attention. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice deadly quiet, "I believe you've wandered into the wrong establishment." The taller man's hand drifted toward his jacket. "Moretti. Fancy meeting you here without your usual entourage." Melissa's heart raced. This was about to become violent. She could feel it in the atmosphere, see it in the coiled tension of Anthony's posture despite his relaxed expression. "Mr. Moretti is a valued customer," she interrupted, surprising even herself. "And I don't allow trouble in my restaurant." All three men looked at her with varying degrees of shock. "Ma'am," the taller intruder said, a hint of confusion in his voice, "you might want to step outside for a minute." "No," she said firmly, reaching below the counter where she kept a baseball bat. "I want you both to leave. Now." A flicker of amusement crossed Anthony's face before it returned to its impassive mask. "You heard the lady," he said. "This isn't the place." A tense moment passed. The other customers had gone silent, some slowly edging toward the exits. Finally, the shorter man muttered something to his companion. They backed toward the door, the taller one calling out, "Another time, Moretti." "I look forward to it," Anthony replied evenly. When they were gone, he approached the counter, his eyes never leaving Melissa's face. "That was incredibly foolish," he said, but there was no anger in his tone, only concern tinged with something that might have been admiration. "They were disrupting my business," she replied, trying to ignore the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "Do you know who they work for?" She shook her head. "The Cardano family. Our primary competitors." His mouth twisted slightly at the word. "And they now know that this place matters to me." The implication hung heavy between them. By intervening, she'd revealed her importance. "I can take care of myself," she said, though they both knew that against men like those, she stood no chance. Anthony looked around the restaurant, at the few remaining customers trying not to stare, at the cheerful decor she'd worked so hard to perfect. When his eyes returned to hers, they held a decision. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "After closing." The hours until closing dragged interminably. Melissa served customers, prepared food, and tried to act as if nothing had happened. but her mind kept returning to Anthony's words and the danger they implied. He'd left shortly after the incident, making a few terse phone calls on his way out, but promised to return. At precisely 8 o'clock, as she was turning the sign to closed, a familiar black SUV pulled up outside. Anthony emerged alone, unusual for him in the evening hours, and waited for her to unlock the door. "Let's sit down," he suggested once inside, gesturing to a booth far from the windows. He'd changed clothes since the afternoon, now wearing a more casual outfit of dark slacks and a gray sweater that somehow made him look more approachable, but no less powerful. "Those men," she began as they sat. "They were here to hurt you?" "Most likely." He didn't sugarcoat it. "The Cardanos have been testing boundaries lately." "But that's not what we need to discuss." She raised an eyebrow. "No? No?" He leaned forward slightly. "We need to discuss you and what happens now." "What do you mean?" "Your intervention today marked you. The Cardanos now know you have some connection to me beyond serving coffee. That makes you a potential target." The reality of those words hit her hard. She'd known, of course, that Anthony's world was dangerous, but she'd maintained the comforting illusion that she existed outside of it, adjacent but untouched. "So what happens now?" She echoed his words. "That depends on you." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty. "The safest option would be for me and my men to stop coming here, remove the association." The thought of not seeing him again created an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. "And the other options?" His eyes, always intense, seemed to see straight through her. "I assign men to watch the restaurant. You accept certain security measures. We continue as before, but with added precautions." "And the cost of such protection?" she asked, not naively. A flash of something. Was it hurt? Crossed his features before his expression became unreadable again. "There is no cost. You saved my life. I protect yours. A fair exchange." "Is that what this is about? Repaying a debt?" "It began that way," he admitted, his voice dropping lower. "It's become more complicated." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. "How complicated?" she dared to ask. Instead of answering, he changed tactics. "Do you know what I am, Melissa? Truly know?" "You're the head of the Moretti family. A. Don." The word still felt foreign on her tongue. "And do you know what that means?" She met his gaze steadily. "You're a criminal. Your business involves things I probably don't want details about." He nodded, accepting her assessment without offense. "I've hurt people. Ordered others hurt. I control territory through means that would horrify you. My world operates by different rules than yours." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," he said with sudden fierce intensity, "before this goes any further, you need to understand what you're becoming involved with. Who I am." "Further?" she repeated, her heart accelerating. Anthony reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. Offering but not presuming. "I find myself thinking about you far more than is prudent. Coming here when there's no business reason. Making excuses to extend conversations." Melissa stared at his outstretched hand. This was the line, the boundary between her old life and something unknown. Everything in her rational mind screamed to pull back, to maintain the simple customer-proprietor relationship that was already dangerous enough. Instead, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and surprisingly gentle for hands she knew could be deadly. "I've noticed," she admitted quietly. A genuine smile transformed his face. "And yet you never mentioned it. I thought I was imagining things, that someone like you wouldn't—" "Someone like me," he interrupted, "rarely gets to be simply a man. With you, during that week, I was nothing more than Anthony. Not Don Moretti, not the boss, just a man indebted to a kind woman." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I've missed that simplicity." The tenderness of the gesture contrasted sharply with everything she knew about him, creating a dissonance she couldn't quite reconcile. "This is insane," she whispered. "You're, and I'm—" "Yes," he agreed. "Completely insane." His free hand reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face. "Which is why I need you to be certain." Melissa felt herself standing at a precipice. Behind her lay safety, normalcy, the life she'd built. Before her, an abyss of unknowns with this dangerous man at its center. "I'm not certain of anything," she said honestly. "Except that I don't want you to stop coming here." It wasn't quite a declaration, but from the way his eyes darkened, it might as well have been. "Then we proceed carefully," he said, his voice rough with restraint. "Very carefully." As if to demonstrate his meaning, he lifted her hand to his lips, placing a kiss against her knuckles that was barely a whisper of contact. The restrained gesture sent a shiver through her more powerful than any passionate embrace could have. "My men will watch the restaurant," he continued, still holding her hand. "You'll notice them, but they'll be discreet. If anyone suspicious appears, you call me immediately." His expression turned deadly serious. "Promise me, Melissa." "I promise." "Good." He released her hand and stood. "I should go. It's late, and you need to rest." She walked him to the door, acutely aware of the charged atmosphere between them. At the threshold, he turned to face her once more. "There's something you should know," he said quietly. "In my world, when a Don shows interest in someone, it marks them in ways beyond what happened today. It offers protection, yes, but also creates expectation. My men will treat you differently now." "As what?" she asked. His lips curved in that now familiar half-smile. "As someone who matters to me, which means you matter to them." After he left, Melissa leaned against the closed door, her mind spinning. In the space of a few weeks, her life had transformed beyond recognition. Her struggling restaurant now thriving, her simple existence now complicated by a man whose world operated by rules she barely understood. What scared her most wasn't the danger. It was how compelling she found him despite it, or perhaps because of it. The intensity in his eyes when he looked at her, the careful restraint in his touch, the glimpses of vulnerability beneath his powerful exterior. She was falling for a Mafia boss. And there was absolutely nothing simple about that. True to Anthony's word, the security presence around the hearth became noticeable in the following days, though subtle enough not to disturb regular customers. A black sedan parked across the street, rotating men she came to recognize as part of Anthony's organization. Occasional suited figures occupying corner tables, ordering little but watching everything. Business continued to boom, now not just with Anthony's associates, but with a growing clientele drawn by the restaurant's mysterious new cachet and excellent food. Melissa expanded her menu, hired more staff, and even started renovating the unused second floor into a private dining area. Anthony visited almost daily, sometimes for just a few minutes, sometimes for hours. Their relationship evolved in careful increments, a lingering touch when she served his coffee, private conversations in hushed tones after closing, the gradual dissolution of professional distance. 3 weeks after their conversation, he invited her to dinner, not at the hearth, but at an exclusive restaurant overlooking the lake. "I can't remember the last time someone else cooked for me," Melissa admitted as they were seated at a secluded table with spectacular views. She felt distinctly out of place in the elegant surroundings, despite the new dress she'd bought for the occasion. Anthony looked perfectly at home, of course. His tailored suit and confident demeanor seemed made for such settings. "A chef should sometimes be a guest," he said, ordering wine with a casual expertise that reminded her of the vast differences in their worlds. As they dined, he asked about her childhood, her dreams for the restaurant, her life before he stumbled through her door. Unlike their previous conversations, constrained by the restaurant setting, here he seemed determined to know everything about her. "Why the restaurant business?" he asked as they finished their entrees. "You mentioned your grandmother left you the building. but not why you chose to open the hearth rather than sell the property. Melissa sipped her wine, considering. My parents died when I was 12. Car accident. My grandmother raised me, and her kitchen was the only place I felt safe afterward. The memory brought both pain and comfort. She taught me to cook as a way to process grief. Said that feeding people was a form of love that transcended words. Anthony listened intently, his usual mask of control softening. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. When she passed and left me the building, turning it into a restaurant felt like the only possible choice. She smiled slightly. Though if she could see the clientele I'm serving these days, she might have some questions. He laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face. I imagined she would. Your turn, she said, emboldened by the wine and the intimate setting. You know my story. I know almost nothing about yours. His expression shuddered slightly, but he didn't deflect as he usually did. What would you like to know? How does someone become what you are? She couldn't quite bring herself to say Don or Mafia boss in the elegant restaurant, though they both knew what she meant. Anthony was silent for a long moment, swirling the remaining wine in his glass. In my case, by birth. My father was Don before me, and his father before him. I was raised knowing my future was predetermined. You never wanted anything else? A flicker of something, regret, resignation, crossed his face. I studied architecture in college, designed buildings that would never be built. He set down his glass. But family obligations aren't optional in my world. So you took over when your father... She let the question hang. Died, he finished. 5 years ago. Heart attack, not violence, despite what the papers suggested. He leaned forward slightly. Does it bother you? What I am? The question was deceptively simple, but Melissa knew her answer mattered deeply. I'd be lying if I said no, she admitted. There are aspects of your life I don't want to think about. But, he prompted when she hesitated, but I've seen how you treat your people, how you treat me. There's honor in that, even if it exists alongside things I wouldn't approve of. Something in his posture relaxed fractionally. A diplomatic answer. An honest one, she countered. I'm not naive enough to think I can change you or your world. She paused, gathering courage. I just want to see if there's room for me somewhere in it. Not as someone to be protected or an obligation to be fulfilled, but as... This time his voice was barely above a whisper. As someone who matters to you. For myself. Anthony reached across the table, taking her hand in his. You already are, he said, his thumb tracing patterns on her skin. More than you know. The drive back to the hearth was charged with unspoken tension. Anthony's driver maintained a discreet silence as they traveled through the city, the privacy partition firmly in place. Melissa was acutely aware of Anthony beside her, of the narrowing space between them as the car navigated the late-night streets. When they arrived, he walked her to the side door that led to her apartment above the restaurant. His security team remained in the vehicles, giving them a moment of relative privacy. I had a wonderful evening, she said, suddenly shy despite the growing intimacy between them. As did I. He stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the subtle cologne he wore. Melissa. The way he said her name, like a prayer and a question combined, broke something loose within her. She rose on tiptoes, closing the last distance between them, and pressed her lips to his. For a heartbeat, he remained perfectly still. Then, his control shattered. His arms encircled her, pulling her firmly against him as he deepened the kiss with an intensity that stole her breath. One hand cradled the back of her head, the other pressed against her lower back, eliminating any remaining space between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, his eyes had darkened to near black. I've wanted to do that since the moment you brought me soup during the blizzard, he confessed, his voice rough. That long? She smiled, feeling strangely powerful at having affected him so deeply. Longer than was wise. His hand cupped her cheek. "I should go." The regret in his voice was palpable, but so was the restraint. He was giving her space, she realized, allowing her to set the pace of whatever was developing between them. "Or you could come up," she suggested, surprising herself with her boldness. "For coffee." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Coffee." "Just coffee," she clarified, though they both heard the uncertainty in her voice. Anthony studied her face. "Another time," he said gently. "When you're certain it's not just the wine and the evening." The consideration in his response, so contrary to the ruthless image he presented to the world, touched her deeply. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. "Oh?" His eyebrow arched. "I expected someone who takes what he wants without asking." His expression sobered. "In business, perhaps. Never with you." He brushed his lips against her forehead. "Good night, Melissa." She watched him return to the waiting cars, her emotions a confusing tangle of disappointment and respect. Despite the physical attraction crackling between them, he'd chosen to wait. It was both frustrating and endearing. The next morning, Melissa arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual, her mind still replaying the previous evening. She was unlocking the front door when a black sedan pulled up, one of Anthony's security details, she assumed. Instead, a woman emerged, strikingly beautiful, impeccably dressed in a designer outfit that probably cost more than Melissa's monthly revenue. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, her makeup flawless, her entire demeanor screaming old money and power. "Ms. Wright?" the woman inquired, her voice carrying a faint Italian accent. "Yes?" "I'm Sophia Moretti." She extended a manicured hand. "Anthony's sister." Melissa's stomach dropped. She hadn't even known he had a sister. "Nice to meet you," she managed, shaking the offered hand. "Would you like to come in? We're not officially open yet, but I can make coffee." "That would be lovely," Sophia replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Inside, Sophia surveyed the restaurant with the practiced assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating her surroundings. "Charming," she pronounced, taking a seat at the counter. "I can see why my brother finds it appealing." The emphasis wasn't lost on Melissa. "Just coffee, or would you like something to eat?" she asked, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the clear undertones. "Just coffee, thank you." Sophia adjusted her diamond bracelet. "I won't take much of your time." "I simply wanted to meet the woman who has my brother visiting the same restaurant every day like a lovesick teenager." Melissa nearly fumbled the coffee cup. "I think you might be exaggerating." Sophia laughed lightly. "Anthony doesn't do anything without purpose, except it seems when it comes to you." Her expression turned more serious. "He told me about the blizzard, about how you helped him. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Sophia shook her head. "They wouldn't, especially not knowing who he is." Melissa placed the coffee in front of her. "I didn't know then. And now that you do?" "Now I know him as Anthony. Not just his title or his position." Sophia studied her over the rim of her cup. "Interesting. Most people never see past the dawn." She set down the cup with deliberate precision. "My brother's position comes with certain complications, expectations, dangers." "He's made that clear," Melissa replied, beginning to understand the purpose of this visit. "Has he? Has he told you what happened to the last woman he cared for?" The question hung in the air between them. Melissa's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "No." Sophia nodded as if this confirmed something. "Bianca, lovely girl from a respectable family. They dated for nearly a year. Then the Cardanos decided she was a convenient way to send a message." Her perfectly painted lips pressed into a thin line. "She survived, but left the country afterward. Never spoke to Anthony again." Melissa swallowed hard. "Why are you telling me this?" Because my brother is careful with his business but reckless with his heart. And because, unlike Bianca, you have no idea what you're walking into. Sophia's gaze softened slightly. He likes you. More than liked, if I'm being honest. Which makes you both valuable and vulnerable. Are you warning me off? Sophia considered this. I'm providing information so you can make an informed decision. The Moretti family takes care of its own, but becoming part of Anthony's life means accepting risks most people couldn't imagine. I understand. Do you? Sophia raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. The protection he's arranged for you is noticeable. The Cardanos have already identified you as someone of interest. She gestured to the restaurant around them. Your normal life is already changing. Melissa straightened, something in her responding to the challenge in Sophia's tone. With all due respect, Ms. Moretti, I know there are risks. Anthony has been clear about that. But he's allowed me to make my own choices, and I'd appreciate if you did the same. Instead of taking offense, Sophia smiled, genuinely this time. Good. You have spine. You'll need it. She reached into her handbag and extracted a small card similar to the one Anthony had given Melissa weeks ago. My private number. Anthony's not the only Moretti worth knowing. Melissa took the card, surprised by the apparent shift. I had to see for myself, Sophia explained, standing. Anthony doesn't trust easily, neither do I. She adjusted her designer jacket. But I can see why he's drawn to you. There's something refreshingly direct about your manner. Thank you. I think. Sophia's smile turned knowing. It's a compliment, believe me. In our world, straightforward people are rare treasures. She moved toward the door, then paused. One last thing. If you hurt him, if this is some kind of game or opportunistic play, there's nowhere you could hide from me. Are we clear? The threat was delivered with such casual elegance that it took Melissa a moment to process. Crystal, she replied. But it's not like that. Good, Sophia nodded. Then perhaps we'll become friends, Ms. Wright. My brother could use more genuine connections in his life. With that, she swept out of the restaurant, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and undeniable power. Melissa stood frozen, the interaction replaying in her mind. She'd just been both threatened and possibly approved by Anthony's sister, a woman whose existence she hadn't even known about until minutes ago. The bell chimed again, and she looked up, half expecting Sophia to have returned. Instead, Anthony himself stood in the doorway, his expression concerned. I just passed Sophia leaving, he said, approaching the counter. I didn't know she planned to visit. That makes two of us, Melissa replied, still processing the conversation. Anthony's jaw tightened. What did she say to you? She warned me about the risks of being associated with you, about someone named Bianca. He closed his eyes briefly, a flash of old pain crossing his features. I should have told you about Bianca myself. Why didn't you? Because it's not a story I enjoy remembering. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. And because I didn't want to frighten you more than necessary. I'm not easily frightened, she reminded him, reaching across the counter to touch his hand. But I do prefer honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Anthony nodded slowly. You're right. No more protected truths. He took her hand in his. Tonight, after closing, I'll tell you everything. About Bianca, about my family, about the realities of my world. And then, Melissa, if you still want this, he squeezed her hand gently. Then we move forward with clear understanding. I'll hold you to that, she said, squeezing back. The weight of his promise hung between them, heavy with implications. Whatever happened tonight would define the path forward, or end possibilities before they truly began. As Anthony turned to leave, Melissa called after him. Your sister also said one other thing. He paused. Oh? That you've been acting like a lovesick teenager. His surprised laugh, genuine and unguarded, filled the restaurant. Sophia always did have a talent for uncomfortable truths. His eyes, when they met hers, held warmth that contradicted his dangerous reputation. Perhaps she's not entirely wrong. After he left, Melissa began her opening routine, her mind spinning with possibilities both thrilling and terrifying. Tonight, she would learn the unfiltered truth about Anthony Moretti's world, and then she would decide if her heart was willing to risk everything to be part of it. The restaurant was silent, the last of the evening staff long gone. Melissa sat across from Anthony in the dimly lit dining room, the remains of a simple meal between them. She'd closed early tonight, anticipating the conversation to come. "Bianca Rossi," Anthony began, his voice low and controlled. "Daughter of an old family friend. We met at a charity event 5 years ago, shortly before my father died." His fingers traced the rim of his wine glass. She was beautiful, educated, from the right sort of family. The perfect match, according to traditional standards. Melissa listened silently, noting how his expression remained carefully neutral despite the emotion in his eyes. "We courted properly, chaperoned dates, formal dinners, all very traditional. After my father's death, when I assumed leadership, things accelerated." He took a measured sip of wine. "She understood our world, its rules. Or so I thought." "What happened?" Melissa prompted when he fell silent. "The Cardanos happened." His jaw tightened. They were expanding then, testing boundaries after my father's death, seeing if the new Dawn had the same resolve. He met her eyes directly. "They took her on her way home from her sister's house, kept her for 3 days." Melissa's breath caught. "Did they—" "No," he interrupted quickly. "Physical violence only. They knew certain lines couldn't be crossed without igniting a war that would destroy both families." His knuckles whitened around the glass. "But it was enough. When we found her, she was changed." "I'm sorry," Melissa whispered. "She left the country within a week, moved to Europe. Last I heard, she married a Swiss banker." He set down the glass carefully. "She was right to leave. The life, my life, wasn't what she thought it would be." "Is that why you've been so careful with me? Why you've given me so many chances to walk away?" Anthony's eyes, when they met hers, held a vulnerability she'd rarely seen. "You didn't choose this world. You own a restaurant. You serve food. Your life should be simple, uncomplicated." "Life is rarely simple," she countered softly. "No, but some complications are more dangerous than others." He leaned forward. "My men are watching this place around the clock. The protection I can provide is substantial, but not perfect. The Cardanos know about you now, not just as the owner of a restaurant I frequent, but as someone who matters. And that makes me a target." "Potentially," he acknowledged. "Which is why you need to be certain, Melissa. Completely certain this is what you want." She considered his words carefully. The past few weeks had transformed her quiet existence into something complex and dangerous. Yet there was a vitality to it that she'd never experienced before, and at the center was this man, with his contradictions and unexpected tenderness. "Tell me something," she said. "That night in the blizzard, would you have hurt me if I hadn't helped you?" His brow furrowed at the unexpected question. "No." "Why not? I could have identified you, called the police." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Because that's not who I am. Violence is a tool I use when necessary, not a default." He reached across the table, palm up, an offering, not a demand. "There are lines I don't cross, Melissa. Even in my world, there are rules, codes of conduct." She placed her hand in his. "I believe you, and that's why I'm still here." The air between them charged with unspoken emotion. Anthony's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "There's something I need to show you," he said quietly. "Not tonight, but soon. A glimpse of my world, the full reality of it. After that, if you still want this, us." He left the sentence unfinished. "I'm not easily frightened," she reminded him. A small smile touched his lips. No, you're not. It's one of the things He caught himself, eyes darkening with intensity. One of the things I find remarkable about you. The almost confession hung in the air between them. Melissa felt her heart quicken as Anthony stood, still holding her hand, and gently pulled her to her feet. They stood close, the heat of his body palpable in the quiet restaurant. I should go, he murmured, though he made no move to release her hand. You could stay, she offered, her voice barely above a whisper. His free hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her lower lip. When this happens, he said, voice rough with restraint, it will be with complete certainty. No doubts, no shadows between us. The promise in his words sent heat coursing through her. Anthony lowered his head slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she rose to meet him, their lips connecting in a kiss that started gentle but quickly blazed into something more demanding. His arms encircled her, one hand tangling in her hair while the other pressed against her lower back, eliminating any space between them. Melissa felt herself melting into him, the solid warmth of his chest, the surprising softness of his lips contrasting with the controlled strength in his embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, his eyes had darkened to obsidian. Melissa, he whispered her name like a prayer. A sharp knock at the front door shattered the moment. Anthony's posture shifted instantly, his body angling to place himself between her and the potential threat. One of his security team stood outside, expression urgent. Anthony's jaw tightened. Wait here, he instructed, moving swiftly to the door. The hushed conversation that followed was too quiet for Melissa to hear, but she could read tension in every line of Anthony's body. When he turned back to her, his expression had transformed, the tender lover replaced by the calculating Don. I need to go, he said, his voice carrying a new edge. Marco will drive you upstairs and stay outside tonight. What's happening? Anthony hesitated, visibly struggling between his instinct to shield her and his promise of honesty. Cardano made a move against one of our businesses. I need to respond. The clinical way he said it sent a chill through her. This was the reality of his world, the part he'd been trying to protect her from experiencing. Will there be? She couldn't quite form the question. Yes, he answered anyway, understanding her unspoken concern. His expression softened slightly. This is who I am, Melissa. What I do. She nodded, suddenly feeling the full weight of what it meant to be involved with him. Be careful. A sad smile touched his lips. Always. He moved to the door, then paused. Tomorrow, noon, I'll send a car. It wasn't quite a question. I'll be ready, she promised. After he left, Marco, Anthony's most trusted security man, escorted her to her apartment, taking up position outside her door with silent efficiency. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind filled with images of Anthony in this other role she'd only glimpsed in fragments. The morning newspapers carried nothing about any disturbance, but Melissa hadn't expected they would. The true workings of Anthony's world happened in shadows, beyond the notice of ordinary citizens. At precisely noon, a black SUV pulled up outside. The driver wasn't one she recognized, but he carried himself with the same watchful alertness as Anthony's other men. Ms. Wright, he greeted her formally. Don Moretti sends his apologies. He's been unavoidably detained but asks that you still come. He'll join you shortly. The drive took them to the outskirts of the city, eventually turning down a private road that led to an elegant mansion set amidst carefully landscaped grounds. Security was visible but discreet, men positioned strategically throughout the property, surveillance cameras mounted unobtrusively. Inside, Sophia waited in a sunlit conservatory, wearing casual designer clothing that somehow looked more expensive than her formal attire from the previous day. Anthony's running late, she explained, gesturing for Melissa to sit. The business from last night required more extensive cleanup than anticipated. The choice of words wasn't lost on Melissa. Is he okay? Sophia studied her for a moment. Physically, yes. Otherwise? She shrugged elegantly. My brother compartmentalizes well. It's necessary in his position. A housemaid brought tea, served in delicate china cups that probably cost more than Melissa's monthly rent. This is his home? Melissa asked, looking around at the tasteful luxury. One of them. Sophia stirred her tea. The family house, where we grew up. Before Melissa could respond, the door opened. Anthony entered, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that revealed nothing of the night's activities. Only the faint shadows beneath his eyes hinted at a sleepless night. I apologize for the delay, he said, crossing to kiss his sister's cheek before turning to Melissa with a more hesitant warmth. Thank you for coming, despite my absence. I've been entertaining your guest, Sophia said, rising gracefully. But I'm sure you two have things to discuss. She squeezed Melissa's shoulder as she passed, a gesture of surprising solidarity. Remember what I said, she murmured, before leaving them alone. Anthony watched his sister leave with a raised eyebrow. Should I be concerned about what she told you? Probably, Melissa replied with a small smile that faded quickly. Last night. He moved to sit beside her, close but not touching. Last night was business. Unpleasant but necessary. Did people get hurt? Anthony's gaze was steady. Yes. The simple admission hung between them. Melissa had known, of course, had always known, but the confirmation still landed heavily. This is my world, Melissa, he said quietly. The parts I don't want touching you, but that inevitably will if we continue. Why show me this place now? Because you need to see all of it, the protection, the privilege, the power, and the price. He gestured to their surroundings. This house represents generations of my family's legacy. Beautiful, impressive, built on foundations you might find troubling. Melissa looked around with new eyes, seeing beyond the elegant facade to the reality it represented. Why me, Anthony? With your world, your position, why choose someone like me? He considered her question carefully. Because you saw me, just me, when I was at my weakest. No pretense, no power, no position. His voice softened. And because with you, I can almost remember who I might have been in another life. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance between two worlds. By day, Melissa ran her thriving restaurant, now frequented by an intriguing mix of Anthony's associates, curious locals, and food critics drawn by the establishment's growing reputation. By night, she was increasingly part of Anthony's more private sphere, accompanying him to exclusive restaurants, attending small gatherings at his home, gradually meeting the inner circle that constituted his chosen family. Salvatore, his silver-haired consigliere, treated her with old-world courtesy that barely disguised his careful assessment. Marco and Luca, Anthony's primary security, maintained professional distance but gradually acknowledged her with subtle nods of respect. Sophia became an unexpected ally, offering insights into the unspoken rules of a world Melissa was still learning to navigate. Throughout it all, Anthony remained attentive but careful, never pushing her deeper than she seemed ready to go, always giving her space to retreat if she chose. You're being watched, Sophia commented one afternoon over lunch at an upscale cafe. Not just by Anthony's security. Melissa set down her cup carefully. The Cardanos? Among others. Sophia's expression remained casual, though her eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. You've become a person of interest in certain circles, the unknown woman who captured the attention of Don Moretti. I'm hardly mysterious, Melissa protested. I run a restaurant. Sophia's laugh was genuine, but tinged with something darker. In our world, that makes you an anomaly. Anthony's previous companions were all connected families, predictable. You're an unknown variable. Is that dangerous? Everything in this life is dangerous, Sophia replied matter-of-factly. But Anthony has been. Thoroughgoing with security arrangements. The euphemism wasn't lost on Melissa. In the weeks since their confrontation with the Cardanos, Anthony had methodically consolidated his position, strengthening alliances and eliminating vulnerabilities. She didn't ask for details, and he didn't offer them, but the increased deference shown to him by others in their circle told its own story. "There's an event tonight," Sophia continued, changing the subject with practiced ease. "A charity gala. Anthony's attendance is expected." She studied Melissa over the rim of her cup. "He wants you there." As his date? The prospect was both thrilling and terrifying. "As his woman," Sophia corrected bluntly. It would be a public statement of intent, his protection made official. Melissa digested this. What would that mean exactly? "It means the ambiguity ends. No more speculation about your position. You would be recognized as under his personal protection, off limits to rivals, respected by allies." "And what would be expected of me?" Sophia smiled slightly, approving of the question. "Loyalty, discretion, the understanding that certain topics remain within the family. Beyond that..." She shrugged elegantly. Anthony has never cared much for traditional expectations. That evening, a package arrived at Melissa's apartment. Inside lay an evening gown in deep emerald silk, along with a small velvet box containing a delicate diamond necklace. The card simply read, "No pressure. Your choice. A." The gesture was typical of Anthony, offering without demanding, always giving her the freedom to step back if she chose. It made her decision both easier and more complicated. When his car arrived that evening, Anthony seemed genuinely surprised to see her waiting, dressed in the gown that fit as if made for her. "You came," he said softly as she slid into the seat beside him. "I'm here," she confirmed, noting how his eyes darkened appreciatively. He reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that had become familiar, yet still sent warmth coursing through her. "You understand what tonight means?" Sophia explained. She met his gaze steadily. "I'm choosing this. Choosing you." Something shifted in his expression. Relief, perhaps, or a deeper emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "The necklace suits you," he commented, his fingers brushing lightly against her collarbone where the diamonds rested. "It's beautiful, but too much," she protested. "It was my mother's." The simple statement silenced her objections immediately. Anthony rarely spoke of his mother, who had died when he was a teenager. That he would entrust Melissa with something of hers spoke volumes. The gala was held at one of Chicago's most prestigious hotels, the ballroom transformed into an elegant wonderland of flowers and lights. As they entered, Melissa was acutely aware of the reaction their arrival generated. The subtle pause in conversations, the assessing glances, the way people seemed to recalibrate their understanding of the power dynamics at play. Anthony navigated the crowd with practiced ease, his hand a constant presence at the small of her back as he introduced her to a carefully curated selection of guests, business associates, political figures, and members of other influential families. He never identified her as anything other than Melissa Wright, allowing their obvious closeness to speak for itself. "Don Moretti," a smooth voice interrupted as they stood near the bar. "What a pleasant surprise." Anthony's posture shifted subtly, though his expression remained neutral. "Cardano," he acknowledged, turning to face a distinguished older man flanked by two younger associates. Victor Cardano, head of the rival family, smiled thinly. His gaze shifted to Melissa with undisguised interest. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "Melissa Wright," Anthony answered before she could speak. "My guest." The emphasis he placed on the final word carried clear meaning. Cardano's smile never faltered, but something calculating entered his eyes. "Enchanted," he said, taking Melissa's hand and brushing his lips against her knuckles in a gesture that lingered just long enough to be inappropriate. "I've heard so much about you." Melissa extricated her hand with a polite smile that revealed nothing of her discomfort. "All good things, I hope." "Fascinating things," Cardano corrected. "The restaurateur who caught the attention of Chicago's most eligible bachelor." You must be quite special. The implied question hung in the air. Anthony's hand at her waist tightened fractionally. Ms. Wright's restaurant is exceptional, he said smoothly, as is her company. You should visit the Hearth sometime, under appropriate circumstances, of course. The subtle warning wasn't lost on any of them. Cardano inclined his head slightly. Perhaps I shall. His gaze remained fixed on Melissa. When circumstances permit. After they moved away, Melissa released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. So that's Cardano. Victor Cardano, Anthony confirmed, his voice tight. Head of the family. More sophisticated than his subordinates, but no less dangerous. He seemed interested in me. Not in you, Anthony corrected gently. In what you represent. A potential vulnerability. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and carefully orchestrated socializing. Anthony remained attentive throughout, but Melissa could sense the tension that never quite left him after their encounter with Cardano. It was after midnight when they finally left, the car gliding through Chicago's empty streets toward her apartment. I'm sorry, Anthony said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence, for putting you in that position. I chose to be there, she reminded him. Besides, it was educational. A small smile touched his lips. Educational? I learned more about your world tonight than in all the previous weeks combined. She turned to face him fully. The way people defer to you, the careful dance of alliances and threats disguised as pleasantries. And knowing this doesn't make you reconsider? Melissa reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. I knew who you were when I chose this, Anthony. Tonight just made it more concrete. They arrived at her building, and as usual, he escorted her to her door. The routine had become familiar, the careful distance he maintained, the restrained goodbye that spoke of his continued determination to give her space. Tonight, however, Melissa had other ideas. When they reached her door, she turned to face him. Would you like to come in? The invitation hung between them, its meaning unmistakable. Anthony's eyes darkened, but he made no move to cross the threshold. Are you certain? In answer, she reached up, cradling his face between her palms, and kissed him with all the pent-up desire of the past weeks. His response was immediate and overwhelming, arms encircling her, pulling her against him as the last of his famous control began to crumble. When they broke apart, both breathing heavily, the question in his eyes had been replaced by something hungrier, more primal. I'm certain, she whispered, taking his hand and leading him inside. What followed was both tender and fierce, Anthony's careful restraint finally giving way to passionate abandon. His hands and lips seemed to worship every inch of her, his whispered words of admiration shifting between English and Italian as emotion overcame his usual eloquence. Later, as they lay tangled in her sheets, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, Melissa felt a sense of rightness that defied logical explanation. This man, this dangerous, complex man, had somehow become essential to her happiness. What are you thinking? He murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. That I should be terrified by how right this feels, she admitted. But I'm not. His arms tightened around her. Good. The peaceful moment was shattered by the harsh ring of his phone. Anthony tensed immediately, reaching for it with a frown. The brief conversation that followed was terse, conducted in rapid Italian that Melissa couldn't follow. When he hung up, his expression had transformed, the tender lover replaced by the calculating Don. I have to go, he said, already rising and reaching for his clothes. What's wrong? He hesitated, then committed to honesty. One of our warehouses. There's been an incident. The euphemism wasn't lost on her. Cardano? Most likely. He dressed with efficient movements, his mind clearly already shifting to the crisis at hand. I'll send Marco to watch your apartment. Don't leave until you hear from me. The swift transition from intimacy to crisis management was jarring but illuminating. This was the reality of loving a man like Anthony. These moments would always be subject to interruption, to the demands of his position. At the door, he paused, looking back at her with an expression that seemed torn between two worlds. Then he returned to the bed, cupping her face in his hands. "This changes nothing," he said fiercely. "What happened between us, what's happening between us, is separate from everything else. Remember that." She nodded, reaching up to straighten his tie in a domestic gesture that felt strangely significant. "Be careful. Always." He kissed her once more, hard and quick, then was gone. Melissa slept fitfully, waking at every sound, her mind conjuring scenarios each more troubling than the last. When morning came with no word from Anthony, anxiety began to gnaw at her composure. Marco remained stationed outside, his stoic presence both reassuring and concerning. When she brought him coffee, his normally impassive expression showed hints of strain. "Is he okay?" she dared to ask. Marco's hesitation spoke volumes. "The Don can handle himself," he finally answered, which wasn't really an answer at all. By noon, with still no contact, Melissa was debating whether to defy Anthony's instructions and go to the restaurant, anything to distract herself from worried speculation, when a familiar black SUV pulled up outside. Relief flooded through her until she saw who emerged. Not Anthony, but Salvatore, his consigliere, looking grave. "Ms. "Right," he greeted her formally. "Don Moretti requests your presence." The phrasing sent ice through her veins. "Is he hurt?" Salvatore's expression softened slightly. "Not physically, but the situation is complicated. He needs you." The drive was conducted in tense silence. They didn't go to Anthony's mansion or to any of his known properties, but to a nondescript building in an industrial area, heavily guarded by men Melissa recognized as part of his security detail. Inside, she was led through sterile corridors to what appeared to be a private medical facility. Salvatore paused outside a door, his hand on the knob. "Prepare yourself," he advised quietly. Last night was difficult. Nothing could have prepared Melissa for the sight that greeted her. Anthony stood by a window, still in the clothes from the previous night, now rumpled and stained. His knuckles were raw, a cut above his eye had been stitched, and his expression was more closed off than she'd ever seen it. But it was the figure on the bed that drew her horrified gaze. A young man, barely into his 20s, lay connected to various machines, his face badly beaten, bandages covering what appeared to be more serious wounds on his torso. "Who is he?" Melissa whispered. Anthony turned at her voice, his expression momentarily softening before the mask descended again. "Paolo, one of my youngest soldiers." They left him at the warehouse as a message. "Cardano?" "Yes." The single word contained volumes of controlled rage. "This," he gestured to the injured man, "crosses lines. Even in our world, certain boundaries are respected." Melissa approached slowly, taking in the full extent of Anthony's dishevelment, so at odds with his usual impeccable appearance. "You've been here all night?" "He has no family," Anthony said simply. "My men are my responsibility." In that moment, Melissa saw another facet of the complex man she was falling for. The leader who genuinely cared for those under his protection, who took personal responsibility for their welfare. She reached for his hand, carefully avoiding the damaged knuckles. What happens now? Anthony's eyes, when they met hers, held a cold determination that sent a shiver down her spine. "Now, we end this." 3 months later, Melissa stood in the newly renovated second floor of the Hearth, surveying the elegant private dining space that had once been a dusty storage area. Rich wood paneling, soft lighting, and comfortable seating created an atmosphere of exclusive intimacy, perfect for the special clientele who now regularly requested private dining. "It's perfect," Anthony said, coming up behind her and slipping his arms around her waist. He pressed a kiss to the curve of her neck. "You've created something remarkable here." She leaned back against his solid chest, still marveling at the changes in both the restaurant and her life. "We did. I couldn't have managed this renovation without your help." "Your vision, my resources," he corrected gently. "A good partnership." The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Their relationship had deepened in the months following the confrontation with the Cardanos. A confrontation that had ended with Victor Cardano's sudden retirement to Sicily and the ascension of his more reasonable nephew to leadership of the family. Anthony never discussed the details of what had transpired, and Melissa never asked. Some boundaries remained, some questions better left unvoiced. What mattered was the peace that had followed, the gradual relaxation of security measures, and the increasing normalcy of their life together. "Speaking of partnership," Anthony said, turning her in his arms to face him, "I have something for you." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box, not the size she half expected, but flat and rectangular. Inside lay a key. "What's this?" she asked, though she had her suspicions. "The key to my home," he said simply. "I want you to move in with me, or—" He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "I could move in here, above the restaurant. Whatever you prefer." Melissa cradled the key in her palm, feeling the weight of what it represented. "Your home has better security," she said practically, which made him smile. "Is that a yes?" In answer, she rose on tiptoes to kiss him. Yes. Later that evening, as they hosted an intimate dinner for Anthony's inner circle to celebrate the reopening of the expanded restaurant, Melissa looked around at the faces that had become as familiar to her as family. Sophia, elegant as always, deep in conversation with Salvatore. Marco and Luca, maintaining their usual watchful presence while enjoying rare moments of relaxation. Even Paolo, now fully recovered, laughing with the younger members of Anthony's organization. This strange collection of people, bound by loyalty and shared purpose, had somehow become her people too. "A toast," Anthony announced, rising to his feet and lifting his glass. "To the hearth, and to the remarkable woman who created it." As glasses were raised in her honor, Melissa felt a surge of emotion. A year ago, she'd been struggling to keep her modest restaurant afloat, living a simple if precarious existence. Now she stood at the center of an expanding enterprise, loved by a man whose world she'd once thought beyond her understanding. "And another announcement," Anthony continued, his hand finding hers under the table. "As some of you may have guessed, Melissa will be moving into the family home next month." The news was met with knowing smiles and congratulations. Sophia raised her glass again. "Finally. Perhaps now my brother will stop checking his phone every 5 minutes when he's away from you." Laughter rippled around the table. Anthony squeezed Melissa's hand, a private acknowledgement of the truth in his sister's teasing. Later, as their guests departed, Anthony led Melissa to the small balcony overlooking the street where they had first met. The winter night was cold but clear, stars visible despite the city lights. Below, life continued. Pedestrians hurrying home, cars passing, all unaware of the drama that had unfolded in this unassuming corner of Chicago. "A year ago," Anthony said softly, "I was stumbling through a blizzard, my car broken down 6 blocks away, my phone dead, certain I was facing a very cold end." Melissa smiled at the memory, "And I was about to close up, wondering if I'd make rent that month." "Fate has strange methods," he mused, turning to face her fully. "I never believed in destiny until I met you." The hard-headed Don Moretti, talking about fate? She teased gently, though her heart quickened at the intensity in his eyes. "I've changed," he acknowledged simply. "You've changed me." It was true. The cold, calculated efficiency that had defined him was now tempered by something softer, more human. He remained Don Moretti to his people, commanding respect and loyalty. But with Melissa, he was simply Anthony, a man capable of tenderness, laughter, and profound love. "We've changed each other," she corrected, thinking of her own transformation. from cautious restaurant owner to confident partner of one of Chicago's most powerful men. She had learned to navigate his world without losing herself in it, to accept the darker aspects without condoning them. Anthony reached into his pocket, and this time withdrew a very different box, small and square. Melissa's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a ring, the diamond catching the moonlight. "I had a speech prepared," he said with a small, self-deprecating smile. "Something eloquent about second chances and new beginnings. But standing here where everything started, all I can think to say is that I love you, Melissa Wright, more than I thought possible." Tears pricked at her eyes as he continued. "I know my world isn't simple. I know the life I'm offering comes with complications most women would run from. But if you'll have me—" "Yes," she interrupted, unable to wait for the formal question. "Yes, Anthony." His smile, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face, bloomed as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like everything else between them. "My grandmother used to say that feeding people was a form of love," Melissa said softly as he drew her close. "I think she'd be amazed to see where that philosophy led me." "To a very complicated man with a very simple love for you," Anthony replied, his forehead resting against hers. As snow began to fall gently around them, a poetic echo of their first meeting, Melissa marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From a chance encounter during a blizzard to this moment of perfect clarity, their path had been neither straight nor easy. Yet every difficult choice, every moment of doubt or danger had led to this certainty. In loving Anthony Moretti, she had discovered parts of herself she never knew existed: strength, resilience, the capacity to see beyond surface appearances to the complex truth beneath. And in loving her, he had found redemption he never thought possible, a connection that transcended the boundaries of his cloistered world. Outside, Chicago continued its restless pace. Inside, in the warm circle of his arms, Melissa had found her home. Complicated, unexpected, and absolutely right. Two people from different worlds, brought together by a snowstorm and bound by something stronger than circumstance. A mafia boss and a waitress, defying every expectation to write their own unlikely story. As Anthony's lips found hers in a kiss that promised forever, Melissa knew with absolute certainty that some risks were worth taking, some loves worth fighting for, and some happy endings arrived in the most unexpected packages.